I carried my wife's ashes through JFK at midnight, and my family left me to walk alone. You ever felt that mix of exhaustion, rage, and emptiness that makes your body shake even though you're just standing still? That was me at 23:45, staring at the glowing arrival boards while the rest of New York moved like nothing had happened. Everyone else had family waiting. Wives, husbands, kids, parents. They ran into hugs, into warmth. And me? I had a backpack that carried my wife's urn. That was my welcome home. Before I dive deeper, let me just say this. If you're into true revenge stories, raw and unfiltered, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what comes next. Trust me, this one only gets darker. See, just 7 days before, I was in Germany. Honeymoon. First trip abroad with the woman I swore I'd spend the rest of my life with. We'd been married for 11 days. 11. And then a car accident on a winding road near Heidelberg made me a widower at 29. I spent the week fighting with insurance, the U.S. consulate, and hospital staff who couldn't stop apologizing in broken English. And in between all that, I picked out a cremation urn instead of souvenirs that you'd think, at the very least, coming home, someone would be there. A ride, a hug, even just someone standing with me in silence. I wasn't asking for much. I didn't even text strangers. I texted my family group chat. That chat had 3 people. My aunt, who raised me after my parents died, my cousin, who I grew up with like a brother, and my so-called best friend, who used to swear we were inseparable. That I wrote one line. Landing 23:45 at JFK. Can anyone pick me up? Simple. Not dramatic. Not manipulative. Just a man asking his people to meet him when he came home carrying the ashes of his wife. The replies? Oh, they cut deeper than silence. My aunt. That's so late, honey. I have work in the morning. Just grab a taxi. My cousin. Bro, I literally just ordered pizza. Can't make it. Uber's cheap right now. And my brother? My childhood best friend? He didn't even open the message. Left it unread, like I didn't exist. So, yeah, that's how I walked through customs with an urn in my backpack. My ring still fresh on my finger, and not one person waiting at the gate. Just strangers brushing past, a sea of noise, announcements echoing, people laughing and carrying duty-free bags. The world kept moving, and I stood still until I realized something. That night, at JFK, I stopped being the victim. I stopped waiting for people to show up. Because when you bury your wife before you even hit 30, something inside you breaks. And once it breaks, you either crumble or you start directing the scene yourself. I smiled. No tears, no outburst, just a smile. Because in that moment, I already knew. My so-called family thought they left me standing alone. What they didn't know was that they had just cast themselves in the leading roles of the last play I'd ever give them. When I got home from JFK, it wasn't quiet. Not really. The house looked the same. Our wedding photos still on the wall, her slippers by the bed, her mug on the counter, but the silence wasn't peace. It was the kind that hums in your ears, the kind that gnaws at you, the kind that makes you feel like you're standing inside a tomb. I sat on the edge of the bed with the urn in my lap, staring at the ceiling. It would have been so easy to break, to let myself collapse, scream into a pillow, drink until the world blurred. But I didn't, because I realized something that night. Pain is powerless if you learn to bend it into shape. I thought back to every little betrayal before this one. My aunt borrowing money from my inheritance when I was 19 and promising she'd pay it back. She never did. My cousin blaming me when his car got towed because we switched spots at work. My best friend stealing an idea we brainstormed together in college and presenting it as his own to a startup accelerator. And each time, I let it slide. I told myself, family, loyalty, brotherhood. And each time, they showed me I was wrong. But this, not showing up when I landed with my wife's ashes, this was the last straw. That night I decided, if they couldn't play their roles as family, I would write them new ones. Roles they couldn't escape. The first step was control. I needed the narrative in my hands, not theirs. Grief is invisible until you put it on display. And if they wanted to act like they were too busy for me, fine. I'd make the whole world busy with me. So I called someone I trusted. Ironically, someone outside of family. An old friend from college, an actress who did indie films and commercials. She knew how to play emotions. I told her exactly what I needed. One photo, staged at the airport, of a stranger who noticed my pain and offered me kindness when no one else did. She didn't even hesitate. She showed up in a gray hoodie and no makeup, looking like just another passenger. We staged the shot, me holding the urn, her arm around me, the kind of hug that says, "I don't know you, but I see you." It was raw, believable, and heartbreaking. Then I contacted another friend, a filmmaker. I didn't need a whole movie, just a few shots, captured discreetly. Me sitting on a bench in the terminal, the way the fluorescent lights drained the color from my face, me dragging the suitcase across an empty parking garage. Nothing fancy, no dialogue, just loneliness, captured on film. And here's the thing, none of it was fake. The hug was staged, the camera angles were planned, but the grief? That was real. You can't script the way my shoulders sagged under the weight of that urn. You can't direct the way my eyes looked when I thought about scattering her ashes over the ocean. I knew social media would eat it alive. People love stories of strangers stepping up when family fails. I wasn't just telling a story, I was holding up a mirror. And when that mirror reflected my aunt, my cousin, and my so-called best friend, the internet would see exactly what I saw. Absence. That I sat there, sketching it out like blueprints. A post first, to set the tone. Then, a dinner invitation, to reel them back in. And finally, the reveal. The footage, the truth, their own guilt thrown back at them. Was it petty? Maybe. Was it cruel? No. Cruelty would have been dragging their names through the mud, exposing them publicly. What I had in mind wasn't exposure, it was education. A lesson. And I was more than ready to be their teacher. I lay back on the bed, the urn still in my hands. And for the first time in a week, I didn't feel crushed. I felt focused, sharp, like every nerve in my body was awake. They thought they could dismiss me with excuses. But soon, they'd realize what they really did that night. They wrote themselves out of my life and straight into my revenge. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and that sour taste in my mouth that only grief, or too many sleepless nights, can leave behind. I set the urn on the dresser, almost like she was watching me. And in a way, she was. Every move I made from here on out, I wanted it to be something she'd nod at, something that said, "You didn't let them break you." So, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and started writing. Not to them. Not another text into the void. This was for the world. The post had to be short, sharp, and impossible to ignore. I typed, "My flight landed at 23:45 last night. My family didn't show up. But a stranger noticed me walking out of the terminal with an urn and simply said, 'You look like someone who needs a friend.'" She gave me a hug. Sometimes kindness comes from where you least expect it. Then I attached the photo. Me, eyes, red and heavy. Her, looking like a tired traveler who just happened to care. The urn was visible enough that people could tell what it was. No hashtags, no long backstory, just raw truth. When I hit post, I didn't expect the avalanche. Within hours, my phone started vibrating nonstop. Comments flooded in. "I'm so sorry for your loss. How could your family not be there for you? This stranger deserves the world." It hit Reddit, then Facebook, then Twitter. By noon, I had strangers from 3 different countries messaging me, offering prayers, offering rides if I ever needed one, even offering to send food. And the guilt? Oh, it was delicious. I knew my aunt, my cousin, and my best friend were reading it. Even if they didn't comment, they saw it. They had to. And I knew what would sting the most. Not their names being dragged, but the silence around them. The internet had filled the void they left. Strangers were now my family. And the people who were supposed to be my blood were invisible. I went to the kitchen, poured myself coffee, and scrolled. Every share was another knife twisting deeper. Not for me. Oh no, I felt lighter with every click. It was for them. For the 3 people who thought they could brush me off with excuses and go back to their cozy nights. Now, when they opened their phones, the whole world was a reminder of what they didn't do. That night, I got a text from my cousin. Short, almost cowardly. "Saw your post. Damn, man, sorry. Didn't think you'd need me that bad. Didn't think I'd need him." I laughed. Out loud. My wife had died, and he thought need was a casual choice, like picking toppings on a pizza. My aunt's message came next. "Honey, I feel terrible. You know I would have been there if I could. The morning shifts are killing me." She even added a sad face emoji, as if that would erase the fact she chose sleep over me carrying an urn alone. And the best friend? Nothing. Radio silence. He had always been good at ghosting when things got messy, but that was fine. Because words didn't matter anymore. What mattered was setting the stage for Act 2. The post wasn't revenge, it was bait. And it worked better than I expected. People started asking if I'd hold a memorial dinner, if they could send flowers, if there was a way to honor her. That's when it hit me. The perfect setup. I'd invite the three of them, my aunt, my cousin, my friend, to a private dinner in her memory. Just us, quiet, intimate, respectful. They wouldn't dare say no, not with the internet watching, not with the guilt pressing down on them. And at that dinner, they'd finally see the footage. The 90 seconds of truth. I leaned back in my chair and pictured it. Them sitting across from me, sipping wine, trying to act like the family they never were. And then, the screen lighting up, the film rolling. Their faces reflected back at me as they watched what I lived. The silence, the emptiness, the moment I looked straight into the lens and said, "This is who showed up, and this is who didn't." For the first time in days, I felt something other than grief. It wasn't joy, not exactly. It was clarity. The plan was working, and my so-called family? They had no idea they'd already stepped into the trap, that if the post was the hook, the invitations were the net. I drafted them late at night, sitting in the same kitchen where my wife once laughed at my awful cooking attempts. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was about to send out an invitation not for joy, not for love, but for guilt. Every word had to be calculated. I didn't make one message and send it to all three. No, that would have been lazy. I tailored each one like I was designing a custom lockpick. To my aunt, I wrote, "I'm planning a small dinner to honor her memory. I know work's been draining you, but I'd really appreciate your presence. It would mean a lot to me as the woman who raised me." I knew she couldn't resist being called the woman who raised me. It stroked the part of her ego that still wanted to believe she was a mother figure. Even though she failed at the one moment it mattered most. "To my cousin, the pizza king," I wrote, "A few of us are gathering for a memorial dinner. It won't be big, but I'd like family there. I think it's time we show up for each other." He loved the idea of showing up because he knew deep down he hadn't. This was my way of dangling redemption in front of him. And to my so-called best friend, the hardest nut to crack, I wrote, "I'm hosting a dinner in her memory. I know you've been busy, and I haven't heard from you, but it would mean a lot if you came. I don't want this distance between us." It was bait disguised as an olive branch. He prided himself on being the one who could fix things when he wanted to. I gave him the perfect stage to try it out. I sent them all within 5 minutes of each other. Then I sat back and waited. The first reply came from my aunt, less than 10 minutes later. "Of course, honey. I wouldn't miss it. Tell me the details." Her guilt was eating her alive. I could practically hear the relief in her words. She thought this was her chance to rewrite the story. My cousin waited a few hours, probably rehearsing how to sound supportive. His message read, "Yeah man, I'll be there. Sorry for being distant. Family first, right?" The hypocrisy almost made me laugh. Family first? He had put pizza first. But I didn't call him out. Not my best friend was last. His reply came the following afternoon. "I'll come. Let me know when and where." No apology. No warmth. Just obligation wrapped in cold words. And that was fine. Sometimes silence tells the loudest truth. I booked a private dining room at a small Italian restaurant downtown. It had soft lighting, heavy curtains, and a mounted projector for business presentations. Perfect cover. No one would suspect I was about to debut a short film of their absence. The restaurant manager asked if it was a wedding anniversary dinner. I almost laughed in his face. Instead, I smiled and said something like that. Then came the final detail, the baited hook I knew they couldn't resist. I posted publicly, planning a small private dinner in her memory this weekend. Keeping it close, keeping it family. No names mentioned, no details given, but just enough so that if any of them considered backing out, they'd know people were watching. Their reputations weren't just in my hands anymore. They were in the hands of the hundreds of strangers who had already cried over my story. The stage was set. I stood in front of the mirror that night, straightening the collar of my shirt. I whispered to my reflection, "You wanted a family? This is the last time they get to play that role." And for the first time since my wife's accident, I felt control. Not over the past, not over the pain, but over what came next. They thought they were coming to a memorial dinner. What they didn't know was that they were walking into a reckoning. Preparation was everything. Revenge without precision is just noise, and I wasn't interested in noise. I wanted clarity. I wanted their excuses to echo back at them until they couldn't breathe under the weight of their own silence. The restaurant I picked was perfect, a quiet Italian spot tucked into a side street in Lower Manhattan. Brick walls, low ceilings, warm lighting, intimate enough to feel safe, private enough to hide secrets. The manager gave me access to their private dining room, the kind usually reserved for board meetings and small weddings. Heavy velvet curtains, a long wooden table, and, most importantly, a projector mounted to the ceiling with surround sound. The first time I walked in, I didn't see a dinner table. I saw a stage. I called my filmmaker friend, the one who had captured me at JFK. He was more than willing to help. Together, we went over the footage frame by frame. Me sitting on that plastic bench under buzzing fluorescent lights. Me dragging my suitcase across the echoing parking garage. Me looking straight at the camera for a split second, eyes hollow but steady. Keep it short, I told him. 90 seconds. No music, no effects. Just raw. He nodded. Minimal is powerful. Let the silence do the work. We cut it together in a single night. By the time the final frame faded to black, even I felt a chill crawl up my spine. And I had lived it. Next came logistics. I paid the restaurant extra to dim the lights during dessert, claiming I wanted to play a slideshow of wedding photos. The staff didn't question it. Grief makes people overlook details that I also arranged for discreet recording. Not for the internet. No, that would have been cruel and messy. This was for me. For closure. I placed 2 small cameras in the corners of the room. They blended into the decor, hidden among plants and wall sconces. If my family tried to deny what happened that night, I'd always have proof, but the real setup wasn't the technology. It was psychological. In the days leading up to the dinner, I sent small reminders to each of them. A text to my aunt. Thanks again for being there for me this weekend. Subtle guilt. To my cousin. Can't wait to catch up. It's been too long. False warmth. And to my best friend, the coldest message of all. Glad you're coming. It means more than you know. That one wasn't even a lie. Each message was a string, pulling them closer, wrapping tighter. They thought they were walking toward redemption. In reality, they were marching into a carefully set trap. On the day of the dinner, I arrived an hour early. I wore a dark suit, not flashy, but sharp. My wife always said I looked dangerous in black. I let that memory sit in my chest as I set the urn in the center of the table, surrounded by 3 candles. Not as decoration, as a reminder. When the projector tested, the light flickered across the urn, casting long shadows on the wall. It looked almost cinematic, like she was watching the scene unfold. For a moment, I whispered under my breath, "This one's for you." By the time the waiter brought out the first bottle of wine, the stage was ready. The room smelled faintly of garlic and basil, the kind of comfort food that hides tension under its aroma. I checked the cameras one last time. Perfect. Then I sat at the head of the table, hands folded, heart steady. For days, I'd imagined this moment would make me nervous. But as I stared at the door where they'd soon walk in, I felt calm. Cold, but calm. They thought they were coming to honor her. They were wrong. They were about to face themselves. The night before the dinner, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was nervous, but because I was remembering. See, revenge doesn't come from one single wound. It comes from cuts stacked on top of each other until you're bleeding out and no one notices. That's what my family had been doing for years. Death by 1,000 betrayals. I went to the closet and pulled out a box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were papers, letters, receipts, things I'd shoved away, thinking they didn't matter. But tonight, they did. Tonight, they were evidence. The first envelope I opened took me back to 19. I had just lost my parents, and my aunt was all I had. She told me she needed to borrow money from my inheritance to cover medical bills. I signed the check because I trusted her. Months later, I found out those bills were real, but they weren't hers. They belonged to her boyfriend at the time, and she never paid me back. I pulled out the old bank statement. The numbers were right there in black and white. At the time, I swallowed the betrayal because I didn't want to lose the only family I had left. But now it was just another nail in the coffin of our relationship. Next was my cousin. God, the number of times he threw me under the bus. But the one that stung the most was the credit card stunt. We shared an apartment in college, and he borrowed my card to order textbooks online. Except textbooks don't. Cost $500 at Best Buy. I got slapped with the debt, and he laughed it off as a mix-up. I still had the email from the bank, the overdraft notice, the collection calls I had to handle. He never even apologized, and then there was my so-called best friend. This one still burned. We spent months brainstorming an app idea in our dorm. Late nights, pizza boxes, scribbles on whiteboards. It was ours. Or so I thought. One day, I walked into a pitch competition and saw him on stage, selling the idea as if I didn't exist. He even used my slides. I stood in the audience, clapping with everyone else, my name erased from my own work. He didn't win, but that wasn't the point. The point was betrayal that I printed out the old emails we'd sent each other. My words, my diagrams, in black and white that I spread it all out on the bed. Bank statements, overdraft notices, emails, receipts. Like puzzle pieces of a story I'd ignored for too long. I didn't need to show this evidence at the dinner, not unless I wanted to. But having it there, having it ready, gave me power. It reminded me that their betrayal didn't start at JFK. It had been building for years. This wasn't about one night at the airport. That night was just the breaking point that I placed the papers into a folder, neat and organized. Not because I planned to hand it to them like a prosecutor, but because I liked the weight of it. I liked knowing that if they tried to twist the truth, I had it locked down. The next morning, I tested the projector again. 90 seconds of silence, of loneliness. Then I looked at the folder on the table. Two weapons, side by side. The film and the evidence. One emotional, one factual. Together, they were unbreakable that I lit the candles around the urn and let the wax drip slowly onto the table. Each drop felt like a countdown. Tick, tock. They were running out of time. That night, when they sat down at the table, they'd think they were here to honor her. But what they were really walking into was their own history, laid bare. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the man who'd been abandoned at the airport. I felt like the man who was finally ready to make them see exactly who they were. The night of the dinner, I arrived an hour early, as planned. The urn sat at the center of the table, candles glowing softly around it. I adjusted the projector, remote in my pocket, and looked over the setup one last time. The restaurant was quiet, only muffled laughter and clinking glasses coming from the main dining area. But in this private room, it felt like another world. At exactly 7 o'clock. The first knock came at the door. My aunt. She walked in with a heavy perfume cloud, dressed in a black blouse and pearls, as if overdressing could erase the fact she hadn't been there when I needed her most. She kissed me on the cheek and whispered, "You look so strong, honey. She'd be proud of you." I smiled tight-lipped. "We'll see." 5 minutes later, my cousin arrived. He looked uncomfortable in a collared shirt, like he'd been dragged out of his comfort zone. He gave me a half-hearted hug and said, "Man, it's good to see you. I wish it was under better circumstances." His voice cracked at the end, but not from emotion, from nerves. And then came my best friend. He strolled in last, no tie, just a wrinkled button-down. He gave me a nod, not a hug, and muttered, "Sorry for your loss." The same word strangers had written under my post. Strangers had shown more compassion than he had. That we sat down. The waiter poured wine. For a moment, it almost looked like a family dinner. Almost that I let the silence stretch, forcing them to fill it. My aunt was the first to break. "I can't stop thinking about her," she said, dabbing her napkin against eyes that weren't wet. "She was such a light in your life. And I'm so sorry I couldn't be at the airport. You know how work is there." It was the excuse, polished and rehearsed. My cousin jumped in next. "Yeah, man. I feel terrible about that too. I thought you'd be okay getting a ride." I didn't think. Well, I didn't realize it would mean that much. I tilted my head. "It didn't mean much to you. That's the point." He shifted in his seat, staring at his wine glass. Finally, my best friend spoke. His voice was flat. "I should have come. I messed up. That's all there is to it." It was the closest thing to honesty in the room, and yet it felt hollow. I leaned back, letting them squirm. Every word they spoke was another mask slipping, another sign they knew they'd failed me. The food arrived. Pasta, bread, salad, but nobody touched it. Their forks scraped plates out of obligation, not hunger. The air was thick, heavy, almost choking. At one point, my aunt tried to change the subject. "So, how's work been? Are you planning to go back soon?" I smiled cold. "Work's fine. But tonight's not about work. It's about who shows up when it matters. The silence that followed was suffocating. My cousin coughed. My friend took a long sip of wine. My aunt fiddled with her pearls. They couldn't meet my eyes, and that's when I knew the timing was perfect. They were restless, guilty, desperate to move on, which meant they weren't ready for what was coming next. I stood slowly, raising my glass. To her, I said, voice steady. The one person who never let me down. They raised their glasses too, murmuring agreement, but none of them looked. Me and the I sat back down, slipped my hand into my pocket, and felt the remote. 90 seconds of truth waited behind one click, but not yet. No. First, I wanted them to stew a little longer. To feel the weight of the urn in the room, the weight of my silence pressing down harder than any words I could say. I watched them shift in their chairs, watched their eyes dart to the candles, to the projector on the ceiling, to me. The cracks were forming. And soon, the facade of family would shatter completely. The dinner dragged on, but no one was really eating. Forks clinked half-heartedly, wine glasses emptied too fast. The guilt hung heavier than the steam rising from the pasta. I let the silence sit for a while, watching them squirm. Then I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table. Do you know what the hardest part was? I asked softly. My aunt glanced up nervously. The accident. I shook my head. No. That night. JFK. Walking out alone, carrying her in a backpack while the rest of the world reunited with their families. Strangers running into hugs. Strangers holding signs. And me? I had nothing. My cousin swallowed hard, his fork frozen midair. I continued. Except, not nothing. Someone did show up. A stranger. She saw me. She hugged me. She told me I looked like someone who needed a friend. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a printed copy of the photo from my post. Me with red, swollen eyes. Her arm around me. The urn visible in my lap. I slid it across the table. My aunt gasped softly. My cousin leaned forward. My best friend just stared, jaw clenched. That photo went viral, I said. Thousands of people saw it. They wept. They told me how lucky I was that a stranger cared when my own family didn't. My aunt touched her pearls, shaking her head. I saw the post. I cried, I swear. But honey, we didn't realize. I cut her off with a raised hand. No, don't explain yet. You need to know the truth first. They froze. I let the silence stretch, then dropped the bomb. She wasn't a stranger. She was an actress. A friend of mine. I staged it. My cousin's eyes widened. What? My best friend finally spoke, voice sharp. So you lied? You manipulated everyone online. I smiled, slow and deliberate. No, I didn't lie. The hug was staged. The photo was staged. But the grief? That was real. The loneliness? That was real. You think I could fake the way I looked in that picture? None of them answered. I leaned back. I needed the world to see the truth. I needed you to see yourselves through my eyes. Because clearly, you weren't going to listen to my words. You needed a mirror. My aunt whispered, "Oh my God." Like she was realizing the floor beneath her was cracking. My cousin pushed the photo back toward me, his hands shaking. So this dinner, what is this really about? I tapped the urn with my finger. It's about her. It's about me. And it's about you. About who shows up when it matters. And who doesn't. My best friend scoffed, trying to regain control. You're being dramatic. We made mistakes, sure, but staging photos? That's insane. I stared at him until the smirk drained from his face. Dramatic? You haven't seen dramatic yet. The room went quiet again. The candles flickered. The air conditioner hummed. Every sound felt magnified. I reached into my pocket and wrapped my fingers around the projector remote. I didn't press it yet. Not yet. Instead, I looked at each of them, one by one. My aunt, clutching her pearls like a lifeline. My cousin, sweating into his untouched plate of pasta. My best friend, trying to mask fear with arrogance. You think this photo was the performance? I asked quietly. No, that was just the trailer. The real film starts now. And with that, I clicked. The remote, the screen behind me flickered to life. The room dimmed as the projector hummed, casting pale light over the table. Their eyes snapped to it instantly. Black screen. Then the first frame. Me sitting alone on a plastic bench in JFK, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. None of them spoke. None of them could. This wasn't the climax yet. But it was the moment they realized the ground beneath them wasn't solid anymore. It was cracking wide open, and they were about to fall. The screen lit up the room with its cold, sterile glow. My aunt's face tightened, my cousin leaned forward, and my best friend crossed his arms like he was bracing for impact. The first shot appeared, me sitting on that hard, plastic bench in JFK. The camera angle caught every detail, the way my shoulders slumped, the way my hands clenched around the strap of the backpack carrying my wife's ashes. The silence in the room was so thick, I could hear the faint buzz of the projector. Next clip, me dragging my suitcase across the empty parking garage. My footsteps echoed like gunshots. The camera followed just far enough back to show how small. I looked in that massive, empty space that my aunt covered her mouth with her hand. My cousin's eyes darted to me, then back to the screen. My best friend didn't move. The footage cut to me standing by the curb, the wind tugging at my jacket, the urn weighing down my shoulders. Cars drove past, families reunited in hugs all around me, but I stood there, alone. And then, the final shot. I turned toward the camera, my face hollow, my eyes burned out but steady. I looked directly into the lens and whispered, "This is what it looks like when no one shows up." Black screen. The film ended. 90 seconds, but it landed like a hammer. The room stayed dark, only the glow of the candles flickering across their faces. No one spoke at first. My aunt was the first to break. She started sobbing into her napkin, her pearls rattling against the table. I should have been there. God forgive me, I should have been there. My cousin's face turned pale. He muttered, "Man, I didn't know it was like that. I thought." His voice trailed off, like even he realized how pathetic his excuses sounded. And my best friend? He sat back, jaw clenched, eyes cold. He wasn't crying. He wasn't apologizing. He was just staring at me like I had stabbed him in the chest with truth. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. My voice was calm, steady. "This isn't about forgiveness. This isn't about excuses. It's about reality. This is who you are. When I needed you most, you chose sleep. You chose pizza. You chose silence." My aunt tried to reach for my hand. I pulled it back. My cousin stammered, "We can make this right, man. We can do better from now on." I shook my head. "No, you had one moment. One moment to show me who you were. And you did." I turned to my best friend. "And you? You didn't even open the message. Not a single word. You knew what I was going through, and you looked away. That silence says more than any apology ever could." His lips curled into a bitter smile. "So this is it. You bring us here just to humiliate us." I held his stare. "No, I brought you here to show you the truth. Humiliation is just the side effect." The room went dead silent again. I stood, raising my glass of wine. The projector behind me was dark now, but the image of me alone in that terminal still hung heavy in the air. "To those who never let me down," I said softly, "even if they were strangers, even if they had no reason to care. To the people who show up." I drank. Alone. They didn't dare raise their glasses this time. Then I set the glass down, picked up the urn, and looked each of them in the eye one last time. "This was your lesson. Remember it. Because after tonight, I'm done. There's no family left here. Just 3 people who taught me the meaning of absence." I walked out, leaving them in the dark, the candles still flickering around an empty table. Behind me, I heard my aunt's sobs, my cousin's muttering, and my best friend's silence. The sound of 3 people realizing they had just lost me. Forever, and for the first time since the accident, I felt free. When I left that restaurant, I didn't look back. I could have stayed to watch their faces crumble a little longer, could have listened to their excuses turn into desperate apologies. But that wasn't the point. The point was clarity, and I had it now. For so long, I carried the weight of believing I owed them something. That because they were blood, or because of old promises, I had to forgive, had to bend, had to let things slide. That night, I buried that illusion. The next morning, I drove out to the coast. It was early, the kind of morning where the ocean looks silver and endless. I carried the urn down to the rocks, the sea breeze sharp against my face. My hands trembled, but not from grief this time. From release that I whispered her name one last time, then let the ashes scatter into the wind. They swirled, lifted, and drifted across the waves, just like she'd wanted. For a long time, I just stood there, letting the spray hit my face, the sound of the surf washing through me. And for the first time in weeks, I felt light that I didn't go home after that. I went to therapy. I went back to work on my startup, the one my so-called best friend once tried to steal. I built it stronger, sharper, better. I even started a small foundation in her name, helping people who'd lost someone young that I didn't need my aunt, my cousin, or my brother. I didn't need their apologies. What I needed was exactly what I gave myself, justice in my own way. A clean break. A new chapter. Do I regret it? Not for a second. Some people say revenge is poison. I say it depends how you take it. For me, it wasn't poison, it was medicine. It cut the rot out of my life. And now? Now I live lighter, freer, stronger. If you've been with me through this whole story, thank you. What do you think? Did I do the right thing cutting them out of my life? What would you have done in my place? Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this one. Drop a like if it kept you hooked, and leave a comment with your take. I read them all.